No. It's 3. The last 2 are always silent. Okay. Good evening. Thank you all for joining us here in the Clarence D. Burns Council Chambers. My name is Bill Henry. I'm the councilperson for the 4th District and chair of the Council's Housing and Community Development Committee. We're here tonight for City Council 14-0199R, which is a resolution calling for an informational hearing on the Housing Authority of Baltimore City's participation in the Federal Rental Assistance Program. To my left is Councilman Nick Mosby from the 7th District, Vice Chair of the committee. And to his left is Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark from the 14th District, also a member of the committee. To Councilwoman Clark's left and a little bit back is Miss Maggie Porter of my office. And to my right is Mr. Richard Crumrick, staff to the committee. And we are, and then also even more to the right is Mr. Paul Plymouth of the City Council President's office. And also joining us here in chambers at this time is Miss Angela Gibson representing the mayor. We are here tonight to basically hopefully conclude a conversation that was begun last year. I'm going to go into a little bit of background. In December of 2013, the Housing Authority of Baltimore City was notified by the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development that 20 sites encompassing over 4,000 rental units had been selected for participation in the Rental Assistance Demonstration, or RAD. RAD is designed to allow local housing authorities to fund repairs to their public housing stocks by accessing private capital rather than relying only on federal appropriations. Currently, the Housing Authority has a need of approximately $800 million to repair and maintain its existing housing stock. The Housing Authority has elected to sell selected portions of the sites to private investors while remaining in a management role. In June of 2013, requests for qualifications were published, and then last year, the Housing Commissioner and senior staff appeared before this committee to explain the process of divesting of these properties. This resolution calls on the Commissioner and his staff to return to us and sort of update us on where we are from last year, and also to answer some questions that were raised at that hearing, some of which were answered at the time, but there was not as much documentation of the answer as the committee would have felt comfortable with, and so we will be revisiting those questions today. Since this is revisiting a topic that has already been covered, while we will be allowing the public to ask questions, I would ask that you restrict yourself to questions on issues that maybe either have not been brought up or have not been covered to your satisfaction. If you had already testified on your general opinion on the issue at a previous hearing, then we've already sort of taken that testimony, but this would be an opportunity to ask more questions and learn more about the details of the program that the Housing Authority will be participating in. So with that introduction, I would bring up Commissioner Paul Graziano of both the Department of Housing and Community Development and the Housing Authority of Baltimore City.
Thank you, and good evening, Chairman Henry, and to the members of the committee, members of the audience here. I want to particularly recognize our members of the President Advisory Board.
I'm sorry, Commissioner, this is my fault entirely. One little procedural note that we wanted to do first. We're trying a new practice for informational hearings. Technically, this is taking place as a result of a resolution that's been put into the City Council. And so what we're going to do is, rather than hold the vote at the end of the hearing, which implies somehow that we're going to be listening to what happens and depending on how that goes, voting. The only thing we're actually voting on is, are we going to have a hearing? And we're here, and we're going to have that hearing. So we're just going to do that vote now and take care of that business, and we don't have to worry about that later on. So at this point, I'd like to have a motion from one of my committee members moving the resolution favorably.
Move the resolution favorably.
Second.
The motion has been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Yeah. We talked about this. It turns out for resolutions, we don't have to do a roll call at the committee level. And we have 2 members of the committee who are absent, but with 3 members voting in the affirmative, this resolution will move favorably to the City Council at our meeting on February 23rd. With that housekeeping taken care of, I appreciate the Commissioner's indulgence for the interruption, and pray continue.
I'm just wondering in my mind, if you had not gotten 2 votes in the affirmative, would we all be going home? Or
It would mean that we hadn't actually had the hearing.
Oh, okay.
And we
So
would have to continue.
all right.
We would have to have the hearing
well, thank
again.
you for giving us an opportunity to speak this evening. And I'm not sure I fully understand the parliamentary procedure, but I'll take your word for it. That means I may speak.
Yeah.
So I was acknowledging our resident advisory board folks, otherwise known as RAB, not to be confused with RAD. It does get a little confusing. And members of my staff who are here. I think you know most of them, but my general counsel is here, Jan Gosley, Sharon DuBois, you work with closely, Michael Picorni, and Peter Engel are really the development folks who've been working on all the numbers for this, and my chief of staff, Kim Washington. And
as a constituent, she needs even more of an introduction than that. So if you could say something glowing about her at this point, that would be fine.
Yeah, right. And the deputy executive director, Mr. Scott, is here with us as well. So, and I want to acknowledge some of the advocates who are here and have worked very closely with us over time as well, and members of the general public. I appreciate the opportunity to bring you up to date on where we are. I think we've made a lot of progress. We've clarified a number of things since the last time we met. Just in terms of time frame, and I'll ask Peter and Michael to jump in if I mess up some of this timing, but our expectation is that we will be moving to closings on the first phase of the RAD program, which is really 11 sites, but 12 deals, I think, because one of the sites is being split into 2 parts. Starting this spring, it's like we're probably May, and then into June, July, August, and maybe completing in early fall, I hope. And then we will move into the next phase, or we will be doing that perhaps in lockstep, which is the second 11 sites. The first 11 sites have about 2,300 units. The second have about 1,700. So they're the first phase, same number of properties, but several hundred more units. Also, the second phase has some sites that the Housing Authority actually doesn't own at this point. They were some of the mixed finance or Hope 6 sites that were already put into private ownership many years ago when they were redeveloped. But the point is, despite a lot of technical sorting out between the federal government, the state of Maryland, and our sorting things out locally, communicating with residents, communicating with advocates, and so forth, it's put us back a little bit, mainly because of the state and federal discussions, not because of dialogue we've had with folks here. We're a few months behind where we wanted to be in terms of initially closing, but I think May is a pretty good bet for the first round. Obviously, that means that there'll be the transfer of subsidy and the transfer of the day-to-day management to the new entities, and construction would commence almost immediately thereafter for those as they close. So that's the good part that we're all waiting for, is to see the improvements in these properties. And in the aggregate, as we talked about before, this would be approximately $330 million worth of construction work for these 2 rounds, bringing all kinds of improvements to all of these sites, which are much welcome. If you consider at current funding levels, and if we prorate the funding because we can't put it all into these sites, some has to go to other sites, we might have $1.5 million, $1.6 million at best per year available under the conventional funding. So that means that this work would take an absurd 200 years to get done. So I think we all agree that the money is desperately needed. This mechanism creates an opportunity to tap into private capital with strict restrictions that we've talked about to protect the property and to protect the interest of the residents who currently reside there and future residents who will all come off the Housing Authority waiting list. So that's kind of in a nutshell where we are. I know there was some, last time we met, there was some questions about communication and making sure that the residents first and foremost understood what was going on, and then beyond that, the advocates and the general public. And so I think you have in front of you a packet of materials that represents many of the materials that we have distributed throughout this process. We met with the residents at each of the Phase 1 sites. We met with the residents at each of the Phase 1 sites. I personally went out with pretty much everybody on this team. I guess Sharon wasn't there, but the rest of us were there to discuss what this program meant. And we met over a series of dates from June 4th through July 10th, I believe. July 21st, I'm sorry. We sat down with the residents. We brought the prospective developer in to sit side by side with us and to answer any questions. We committed to a series of RAD reports, and so you see in front of you, I think, 4 different reports that were sent out to all 4,000 plus residents. We were sending them out pretty much monthly for the beginning of the process. We've slowed it down a little bit now because there's been a period of lull in terms of what the residents would see. We'll begin to ramp that up again as we move into the Phase 2 sites. We will do the same visits to all the Phase 2 sites as we've done to the Phase 1s, commencing probably later this summer. And we will recommence the RAD report during that time frame. So that was one thing. One of the things that we heard from the residents was that they wanted something in writing, and these are obviously very much in writing, but they wanted something in writing directed to them personally. So you'll see in here a letter, a 2.5-page letter that was sent out on January 9th, 2015, and it was addressed personally to every one of the residents in the RAD sites. So Mrs. Smith, apartment 2B kind of thing. And I must confess, I didn't sign 4,000 letters with my bare hand. We did a machine thing, but this document does lay out the protections for the residents. It makes reference to federal law, federal regulation, other pertinent information that backs up these claims of protection. So it's not just our thought that you're protected around these issues, but that giving the actual citations on things like the right to return, that fact that people wouldn't be rescreened to maintain their occupancy in the building, how the rent would be calculated. They would continue to pay 30% of their income, that residents could continue to have their local resident association and would also be able to participate in the citywide resident advisory board, or the RAB, that new residents would come off our waiting list, and at least and grievance procedures will be required of the managers of these sites and will be offered to the residents following the Housing Authority's long-term affordable program, which is a well-established set of protocols and protections. And then the permanent affordability of the properties is protected by a number of provisions of federal law and the state tax credit program. And in addition, we have an option, a right of first refusal to purchase the properties back after the 15-year tax credit compliance period. And in addition, at the suggestion of the advocates, we actually went to a ground lease situation. So we would retain ownership, the housing authority would retain ownership of the land underneath the structure through the entire process. And also we are a minority owner of the property. We have a minority interest in that. So there are a lot of different things that were communicated there through the RAD reports and through the sessions that we held at the site. So I think that people are a lot clearer about where we are with all that. There's been a lot of additional discussion. I know our general counsel, Jan Gosley, and Peter Engel, and Anthony Scott, and others have had discussions with the advocates about how we could further embed their rights in documents. We have all these agreements between the housing authority and the various developers, master development agreement, and federal statute and so forth. But just yesterday, today, a couple of days ago, I think we came to agreement that we would add certain provisions to the lease between the new owners of the property and every individual resident that would address issues like grievance procedures, the pet policy, the tenant rent share formula, and so forth, and that those, because they're in the agreement between the tenant and the owner, that gives the resident specific rights to pursue those matters through whatever means are necessary. I will also indicate that we will be continuing to monitor these sites very closely. There will be an asset management division within, well, there is one now, but it'll be expanded to address RAD within Mr. Scott's shop, where we will be monitoring very closely the activities of these folks. And obviously, we first urge, as with any situation, if somebody has a problem, to go see their manager first. But if there was, for some reason, it wasn't being addressed there, they could contact us, and they also have legal remedy through these provisions that would be added to the lease.
Actually, thank you, because that was one of the first questions. I just wanted to make sure that we had nailed down as explicitly as possible, which was the sort of chain of command.
Yeah,
what order do people go in terms of their first complaint is to blank?
Always go to your manager. We say that with our own people. If you go downstairs, take the elevator downstairs, go down and see the manager and say, hey, I got a problem.
And if you don't get satisfaction from the manager, then you go to the...
Well, we have the asset management liaison group, and we'll obviously provide contact information and so forth there. We certainly would then pick up the phone and call the owner or the managing agent and say, hey, what are you doing? If for some reason it couldn't be resolved at that level, we would the resident would have remedy through the provisions of their lease that are enforceable.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Was there? There. Okay.
I think that's. I'm going to give one example of one situation that had come up that kind of got people nervous, and then how we interceded in that matter to address the situation. And this was even before we had negotiated these provisions that will be in the lease, and so, which would probably eliminate a lot of this need to intervene anyway. But there was one developer, and I don't need to name a developer by name at this point, but who had sent out a frequently asked questions document, which I think you have a copy of, to the residents of a certain development. And there were two provisions in there that got folks understandably nervous. One was, these are in the form of questions and answers. Will I be able to smoke in this building? No, absolutely not. We made it very clear when we heard about that it had been discussed among my team and all of the developers, and we said, we're not going to allow you to impose that provision unilaterally. If over time folks wanted, residents in the company and so forth over a period of years or whatever. If they wanted to do a smoke cessation program, we would support that. If they came to agreement somewhere down the road, we could look at it. But we're not going to have a unilateral action like that. We told them it was not acceptable, and they have retracted that. And my understanding is they've sent out a revised FAQ document. The other thing that was in that document, which was counter to our position, was that if you had a pet, now you have to, federal law allows pets for seniors and persons with disabilities in public housing or in other assisted housing. We have a $25 deposit policy. They were raising it to $250, and we said, no, you can do the $225, can't do the $250. So this was I think to me, this was not a breakdown in the process. This was an affirmation, a confirmation that the process works. When we heard that somebody got off track a little bit, we immediately I sent a formal letter to the developer saying, this is not acceptable, you need to correct this, and within 24 hours, a corrected document was out there. So I hope that that provides further comfort to those who are wondering what protections they might have. I do understand that change is always anxiety-inducing, and we're going to do everything in our power to ensure that that folks' lives are not disrupted. And in fact, I know most of the developers are working on plans to do renovation in a way that doesn't involve relocation, or that involves maybe leave your apartment for the day, come back at night, that kind of thing. I mean, it's going to be worked out site by site, but we've tried to minimize as much as possible the disruption to individual households. And so we'll be ramping up over the next, what's now, February, March, next month or two, we'll be ramping up as the sites move toward closing dates. We'll be going in there and communicating directly with each site.
Actually, if I could pause you for a moment, I want to thank one of our guests for reminding me that the other announcement we were supposed to do in terms of housekeeping at the beginning is please take this opportunity to put any phones or other electronic devices that you have on silent or vibrate, or in the case of the occasional council person, remove the battery entirely from the device.
I usually have mine on vibrate.
All right.
Anyway.
I have just checked all of my electronic devices, so we're good. Okay, great. Continue.
Okay, so so that is where we are in terms of the actual transactional side of it. Again, May through the fall for this first phase, and then commencing. I think the second phase, again, I'll ask Peter to jump in if I misrepresent this or have misunderstood. The second phase should move a lot more smoothly because all of the approvals that we needed from the federal government and the state government and so forth will be in place for the second, the basic principles will be there. It's sorting this out on a brand new program that takes time. So I think that we'll catch up on some of this in the second phase. So that I'm feeling very good about. The communications, I think, have been dramatically enhanced. I think the feedback we got at the prior hearing and elsewhere reminded us that this is something that could be trauma-inducing, and that we needed to really get out there, and we did personally get out there and spend a lot of time with folks, and that people wanted to see things in writing, and so we have that, and that we wanted to make sure that all the legal protections that are absolutely possible are embedded in documents like the lease. So I want to thank the advocates for working with us on that. So I think that's a pretty good summary of where we are. Did I miss anything that anybody would like me to?
I know that there are aspects of the website we were going to ask
Oh,
you to run
yes,
through, but what I was going to ask quickly is, I know I have at least one question from the committee. Did you?
Yeah, quick question.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Councilman Mosby.
The website, and I don't know if Michael.
Michael's ready to walk you
Oh,
through.
Michael.
But we're gonna,
Michael Picorni could. You want to just?
actually, can we do one question?
Oh, yes,
first?
of
Thank you.
course.
Okay.
Hey, Commissioner,
Yes.
real quick, post the May settlement, when that commences,
Yeah.
what authority does HABC have to ensure that those unilateral decisions do not take place? Not specific to the pet fee or to the smoking ban, but in the future, say in a year or in 2 years, one of the owners, they want to implement some change. What authority do you have to tell them they cannot or they can implement that change?
Well, there are a number of pieces that are covered that will be covered in the Master Development Agreement, which is between the Housing Authority and the owner. We will be a part owner of the property, so we always have an opportunity to speak up as one of the partners in the deal. The residents are also, as I said, they can communicate with our asset management department, and we believe that the vast majority of any issues can be resolved by picking up the phone. The lease, I wouldn't underestimate the importance of having many of these provisions in the lease. I can't imagine that there wouldn't be things that we couldn't sort out. I mean, we are tied together in so many different ways that it would be difficult to conceive of one of these managers going off on a total tangent. Everything is very tightly defined at this point.
So we're pretty confident that HABC would have the power to control like brand new type of policies, such as the pet fee from $25 to $250, or say like a smoking ban that is just randomly put out.
Yeah, I mean, many of those are covered in the lease itself, in these proposed provisions, and the long-term affordability agreement, which cannot be changed without the approval of the Housing Authority, and that is referenced in the Master Development Agreement. I believe it's referenced in the lease and so forth. It would be in the lease as well. There's something called the long-term affordability provisions that the Housing Authority has established and HUD has approved, and we've worked this out with, for instance, the Maryland Disability Law Center was where we first used these principles, and they essentially allow us to apply the principles of the public housing program to non-public housing, in this case, Section 8 subsidized housing. So that is a legally binding set of rules, the long-term affordability agreement, along with the lease. Okay, so there are agreements between the Housing Authority and the owner, and we can intervene in those places directly, and then there are agreements between the owner and the tenant and the lease, and we will certainly advocate for the tenant if there is an apparent a violation of the lease. I'm not saying we'll necessarily go to court on that issue, but at least we will go to the owner and say this is a violation of the lease. The tenant always has the right to bring their representation to court. If it got to that, I just don't see it really getting to that point.
Understood. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, then why don't we go to the website at this point?
Okay, so Michael Picorni is going to highlight some of the places here. Do you want to just sort of walk us through this, Michael, or do you have a...
Give him the reading from the mic. That way.
This is the Baltimore Housing website, which has a lot of information about all our programs, but you can definitely zoom into the RAD program here. And I don't have my glasses on, so it's, let me see if I can actually, oh, that's not going to help me. Those are my reading glasses. Unless I climb up the wall there and look in there.
So this is the Baltimore Housing website, which you get to at baltimorehousing.org. And we have put right on the front page here a sign for the rental assistance demonstration program. It says "Find out more," and you would just click on it. It's just a button, and it takes you to this page, which has been up for a little while now and has some information about the program. Initially, it has some video and photos of when the Secretary of HUD, the former Secretary of HUD, came and visited and announced the program. And then it has at the bottom here, if you scroll down, which I'm doing now, some links to various documents, many of which the Commissioner referenced in his discussion. So the letter to residents that you have in your packet that went out to all of the Phase 1 property residents in the last few months, the RAD reports, and some are property specific that detail a little more biographical information about the various developers for the various sites. A fairly lengthy frequently asked questions document that is the Housing Authority's frequently asked questions. It deals largely with sort of the baseline program, why we are doing RAD, what we hope to accomplish, that kind of thing. You committee members have that frequently asked questions document in your packet. This is a list that was provided at the first hearing of the inventory of the properties that we're converting under RAD and what phase they're in. And then the reports that are in your packet, the RAD reports, the newsletters that were published over the summer of last year.
And we will, of course, continue to add things to this site as we go back to the RAD reports. We'll add additional to this site as we get more specific information. We'll add things as well to the site over time. So it's
Down a little bit further. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so just at the bottom is just the bottom of the webpage.
We think that's Photoshop, by the way.
What the maybe. So this is the main locus of where you would go on our website for information. HUD also maintains a RAD website, which if I had two hands, I might be able to get to right now, but I can pull it up in a minute. That has more general program information, sort of the history of the program, HUD's updates about the status of the program nationally, and that kind of information.
HUD site. You know, I don't know if we do, but we what might be good is we do a link to the HUD site on our RAD site. If somebody could make a note, if we could do that. It just occurred to me, I don't think we have that direct link. If you could go onto our site and just click on.
Sharon is making the note.
Yes.
So just for reference, this
do we
is
need
the
a
HUD.
council resolution for that?
This is the HUD website.
That's the HUD site. He just went on to Google and pulled it up.
Yep, it's the first thing you get if you Google HUD RAD. But yeah, this is the HUD website.
Yeah. So we'll figure out a way to do a link, direct link to that, make it even more convenient.
Okay.
And that was the HUD. That picture is the former HUD secretary, Sean Donovan, who's now the director of the Office of Management and Budget, came to Baltimore to announce the national RAD program. We're the second largest RAD site in the nation. He made his national announcement here in Baltimore, and so I think it's important.
I saw the list at the bottom there of I guess there were individual reports for what I assume are the Phase 1.
Well, the December, what we did is, what did we do? 3 reports that were generic to all the sites that went to all 4,000 residents in the 22 sites. And then in the December report, we did one directed to each specific Phase 1 site where we went into more depth about the development team and who they were and what they were doing.
So is that download the inventory, is one of those links up there just a very basic list of these are the Phase 1 buildings.
Right
these
there.
are the
Right
okay,
there.
that's
Yeah.
it. That is the RAD inventory.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the RAD inventory.
That's the overall inventory. And as we mentioned, Phase 1 will be closing between May and, I don't know, October of this year. And the Phase 2, we want to go in lockstep and move down as fast as we can into that second phase.
Is there contact information somewhere on the site for the individual proposed owner developers? Like, is there a link somewhere or an address or a phone number to reach Telesis, for example, if your building is going to go be Telesis?
I think that don't we have information about the individual site? the ones that are in the phase one, we have the information about
Okay.
Telesys
Yeah.
Corporation, Barclay, that sort of thing, the Brentwood. So each of those, if you're in those sites, we'll do it for the second set as we move forward.
So someone on
But
that
we could
development
we could
team
also
has a-
just
is a
add
contact
a
person.
generic
Yeah, okay.
list. We could just take the 22 sites and put contact information.
okay.
I know we've done that in some of in one of the earlier RAD reports, there is actually contact. Look back at the first or second report on the back cover, as I recall, there is contact information. It might have been the second one because I don't know if the first one we got it.
Well, the May one is in our packets. That's,
Yeah,
I think
well,
the
flip
earliest.
back. No, go to the
The earliest,
June.
the earliest of these is May 14, and it has the names of the developers, but it does not have contact information on it.
Yeah,
Yeah, like that.
go
yeah,
to
that's
the
it.
last one before December.
Ah, here we go. Which one is
July.
it? Oh, so the December.
July. No,
No, the
July.
July one. The July
July, I
one
think, has their actual names
Yeah.
of the site manager and that kind of stuff, or contact person.
Okay. Yeah, July one has phase one emails and phone numbers.
Yeah,
for
you're right there, right there.
Yeah. Okay.
The site, the
well, that is-
property
that
owner
is on the
developer,
website.
the contact
yeah.
name,
But
the
it-
contact. That's the volume 3.
Could there maybe be a separate link for contacts? as
Well, why don't
opposed
we
to-
just pull this information out and put it
Yeah,
as
right.
a.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
We'll make it a separate,
And
what's it? Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
at this point, certainly the phase one people probably know the developers as well as we do because they've been out there a lot. And I would be shocked if, but we'll make sure we put that there as a separate.
And I just want to, in the interest of full disclosure, I'm saying this fully aware that the city council itself is still in the process of making its own information as open and transparent, as intuitive as possible. We recently just upgraded our Legistar
Great.
system, but there is still a remarkable amount of information that I'm sure citizens would be interested in that right now they have to go in and know which PDF to open
Sure.
to read through to find something. And so, we are in the process of doing that ourselves. And so we're just mentioning this as something that it would be nice. That's all.
Well, you can always emulate our style here.
We are happy to emulate anyone who's doing a better job.
Well,
Yeah.
I do understand in this day and age it's very important to have multiple points of access on information, and the website is certainly one. The hard copy that we put under everybody's door was another because we knew everybody doesn't have a computer. The face-to-face meetings and so forth. So we're going to continue to communicate on all these fronts. So with that, I think that's pretty much where we are, and we're eager to close these deals and get the construction started because that's really why we're doing this, to make people's homes better, make their lives more comfortable.
Okay, Councilwoman Clark.
I wonder if you could, I know you've done this before, but could you do it again? Like, all right, so let's say I live in one of these buildings. What's the, Wyman House?
Wyman House? Okay.
Okay, I live in Wyman. No, I represented Wyman House for many, many, many years.
It's a beautiful site.
Many great
I
parties.
could
and
understand. You
all.
like going to the museum and so forth? It's right there.
Oh, and I represented them all. But right now, I'm living in Wyman House.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in phase one?
Yes.
Okay. So when are they coming to throw me out of my apartment? No.
They're not throwing you out of your apartment.
That's what they say. That's what they say.
Federal
They're
law
not.
prohibits
they're not
them.
saying that, but
Federal law prohibits them from throwing you out. The contract with the housing authority prohibits them from throwing
Okay.
you out. They
they're
can't
not
throw
throwing
you.
me out.
They can't.
So, but they're fixing this building, and I'm very worried because I don't know where I'm supposed to go when I have to get out of my apartment, and I don't know how long I'll be out. I don't have any relatives left except my daughter in Pennsylvania, and she doesn't get along with her husband. I don't want to live there.
Yeah, I know. how that is. But you don't have to deal with that family strife. The developer of this site, if he hasn't already, will communicate with every single person in the building about what relocation requirements would be. And again,
Do I have to get out of my apartment? He's fixing my apartment.
Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe you need to get out from 9 to 5, and they'll have a hospitality room. I don't know, by the way, in particular, the details of Wyman House, but
We want to choose another one that, you know.
I don't know the particulars of any one site. I'm
okay,
saying I
'cause
know the
that's-
developers of. I'm getting older, and I try to not store information that I don't need to know immediately. So I ask
understand.
other people.
I'm not trying this.
No,
this
but the
isn't
point
a
is
trick bag. I'm-
individual owners and managers of these properties, they're already out there communicating with folks.
Okay.
And when they have a specific plan for that site, every resident in that site will know exactly what they'll need to do. And what I've heard as we went out and toured with folks last summer was that many of the developers are seeking to do this work without physically moving people out into situations where they're out overnight or that kind of thing, or for like 2 months or something. That would be, you go into a hospitality suite during the day, and then you come back up at night. You know, like if you had work done on your house, contractors come in, you know, they might rip out your kitchen. You might have a sink sitting on a couple of 2x4s for a couple of days. Well, you know, you improvise during that period, and then
Sure.
you come back. You don't have to leave
Move
your
out. So maybe
home
I'll
every
be able
time.
to stay, and then I just have to keep out of their way while they're fixing the apartment.
Yeah, that's the general approach.
So what are the parameters? So I didn't mean to trap you and say, you know, ask you questions that are in the weeds, so to speak.
No, not the weeds. It's just
But
I can't keep track of them in this brain. It's
But
full of
okay,
stuff.
here's let me put it in context. What has the housing authority put as the standards for the situation of the residents? Are there any standards of coming back to the same? I know that you've made. I know I'm going to be back in this same building because
Yes.
that's been promised to everyone.
right.
I may not be back in my same unit,
Yes.
but I'll be in the building.
right.
How long do I have to not? How long before when I have to get out of my apartment? Does the housing authority tell the developers the maximum amount of time I have to be someplace else before I can get back into a finished apartment?
This is going to be looked at site by site. It's not going to be the same for every site. But what is clear, I want to be very clear to all our residents, all 4,000 plus. The resident will incur no expense related to this activity. So if for some reason we had to move somebody out of their apartment
Right.
into another apartment in the building or elsewhere temporarily, and I'm saying in a lot of cases that won't be the case, they just go out, leave for the day and come back. But if they had to leave and then come back, the developer is responsible for paying for all the costs
Of me
to
being
move,
out of my
the
apartment.
move, the utilities, hookups, you know, you got a new phone over here or whatever utility expenses. If you needed help with packing your stuff, they would do it. If you'd rather do it yourself, you can pack it.
That's
and then
if
they'll
I
take
really have to get out of my
if
apartment.
you have to, and
wholesale.
I believe that. Yeah. Yeah.
So there
yeah.
are going to be empty
Yeah,
units.
we have. I should have said that up front. We are holding approximately 10% of the units vacant in each of these buildings. And so, by the
people
way,
can move in.
if you as an elected official hear that their vacancies are going up, that's planned. We were holding off units so that we'd have the flexibility to checkerboard people around within the building, and that would be the first preference.
So I'm
is,
not elected official right now. I'm a resident of Wyman House.
Oh, I
so
forgot.
You're
I forgot
you're telling
the role.
me
You're going to have
I
to
forgot
go.
the role
Oh, I
playing.
gotta go.
Yeah.
All right, enough. So, but you have just told me that you're gonna make them hold open vacant apartments that I can move into, so I'm not gonna have to move out of that building when I
I'm
have to.
saying that will minimize the need for that. It may be there may be a situation where, depending on where the plumbing stacks are and what the construction approach is, that every situation will be a little bit different.
Sure.
But by holding off 10% of the units, it gives us a much better chance of minimizing the relocation outside of the building. And that if you should have to move outside the building, we will, the developer will cover all of those expenses, will cover all of the inconveniences of, hooking up your utilities there, disconnecting, going back to your original site or new site, whatever it is. But there's no reason to think that you're going to incur an expense related to that.
And
Either
my last question, and my manager is where I go and who I can rely on to connect me with those resources.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the other things that I know we had talked about with members of your staff was the idea of including some of the aspects of the specifics that were detailed in the letter to the residents, including some of that information in your annual plan, which already has a very extensive public comment process, so there would be
Right.
the opportunity for the public to make specific comments about aspects
Right.
of it, and also it would be that memorialization that
Sure.
some people asked about back at the hearing last year.
Yes.
And that is still something that's acceptable?
Yes.
Okay.
It's in the draft plan. That's right. It's in the that's right. They haven't even approved. Yeah, we're still waiting for them to approve that plan, but not because of any of these issues. It's just that HUD takes time to do things.
Okay. The next one I wanted to just check in on from last year's hearing is if you can walk us through the process of how access to Section 8 certificates will be handled for people who do want to leave their high-rise building and move into some other unit.
Sure. In the unlikely event that anybody would want to move out of this fully renovated building,
I know.
that they've probably lived in for decades, the federal law provides that after 2 years, they can come to the housing authority and say, I would like a housing choice voucher, otherwise known as a Section 8 voucher. And then subject to availability, because it's not guaranteed, it's only guaranteed you'll be put on a list, and we have other people on the other list, but subject to availability, you would be given a voucher, and you could move anywhere in the United States with that voucher.
Is there any existing HUD regulation or federal law that either requires or prevents you from giving people in this situation a measure of preference on that list?
I'm going to ask Jan to elaborate. I seem to recall there was some talk about allocating available vouchers between people on the waiting list, the regular waiting list, and people who were on this list asking for to be able to move from a RAD site. And I don't remember the exact terms, but
You gotta use
Yeah,
the mic.
I'm sorry. Yeah, and I should say this for all of you here. I think all of your microphones are live. Which, by the way, this is your warning. All of your microphones are live, and this is not only being recorded but also broadcast live on cable channel 25. Your microphones will now be live, so when you are chiming in to assist your commissioner in specific information requests, please use the microphone so that the guests in the back and the viewers at home can hear you just as clearly as I'm sure he can.
I don't remember the exact terminology that was used in the HUD notice, and HUD is in the process of sending out a new notice that hopefully will clarify some of that. But there was a provision that talked about, as the commissioner said, allocating between the vouchers available between the residents who would want to get a tenant-based voucher after their 2-year period of residency in the RAD site, and those persons who are on the waiting list, as well as other persons who are in the project-based program who have a right to get a voucher as well and move after 1 year, which is the traditional project-based rule. So we would probably have to do that given the availability of vouchers. There would have to be some mechanism in place in order to address that.
In other words, it could be, I don't pick a number, it could be every third voucher would goes to people off this list, and 2 of them go to this list or whatever. But again, we have not established those protocols, and HUD is in the process of writing a clarifying rule, but it'd be something of that sort. There would be some kind of equitable distribution of the available vouchers among the different categories. I would expect that the list of people requesting to move from RAD sites would be a very short list compared to the 25,000 people, for instance, who would be on our Housing Choice Voucher list, the list that we took applications last October.
Just to make sure that I'm picturing that list properly, are any of the people who are on that list, are they interested in getting into a RAD site?
Well, they would have to apply.
Separately?
I could probably imagine that there are people who've applied for the October open waiting list thing that we did that are interested in RAD sites, but that's not the mechanism to get into the RAD site. You'd have to go to the housing authority and apply for our standard public housing list, because remember, the developers are getting the referrals for these sites from us.
And that's what I wanted to clarify. I just wanted to keep straight that there are 2 different lists involved.
2 different
here.
lists, and that hasn't changed. It'll be, you applied for the vouchers, you're over here on this list. If you made the cut, you're on the list of the 25,000.
Right.
At the same time, you can apply for public housing, and that will also include the RAD sites.
Is it unreasonable to assume that there's some measure of overlap, that there are people who are on both lists, right?
Yes,
Okay.
it's certainly the case. There are duplicate requests.
So this is what I'm trying to envision. If my colleague wants to move out of her nicely renovated Wyman House unit after 2 years to make sure that she really wants to leave, if she moves out and she wants to come over and get a housing choice voucher, then by leaving her unit in Wyman House, she's going to create a vacancy.
Right.
And somebody in the list, the RAD list, is going to get to move up and into that.
Which is the Housing Authority's public housing waiting list.
The public authority.
It's just that some of our inventory will now be classified as RAD, but it's going to be the Housing Authority's waiting list.
But I guess my question is, if it turns out to be, Councilman Mosby, who's the next person on that list, to get that unit in Wyman House.
Yeah.
And this is Baltimore. That kind of thing happens all the time. I can't tell you how many times.
The only
somebody,
thing she can't do is sublet the apartment to Councilman Mosby, because that would be a violation of federal
correct,
law.
That's right. But you can.
Glad you said that in front of him.
Right.
But you've got Councilman Mosby on your list.
Right.
And so whoever the new owner of Wyman House is, when they have this vacancy now because Councilman Clark is leaving, they go to that list.
They contact the Housing Authority, we'll send them a name.
Is somebody in the Housing Authority automatically, or is this something that the the database can do automatically. Are they going and finding Councilman Mosby to see if he's over here on the housing choice voucher list also?
No, because you can remain on the voucher list
Even
if
while
we put
you're
you,
in.
if we put you in a public housing unit, or in this case a RAD unit, which is off the same list, you can keep your name on the housing choice voucher list.
Ah.
So you actually could be in a RAD unit. You could go from the public housing waiting list to a RAD unit, and then your name might come up to the top of the Section 8 waiting list
you
before
should
the
play
2
the
years are
horses
up,
for a living.
and you could get a voucher based on that route rather than waiting the
all
2
right.
years and going in and asking to be put on the transfer list.
Okay, so at the point where you and HUD work out the specifics
Yes.
for how this is going to actually physically work.
Right.
At that point, how is that policy made public or conveyed in a fashion so that people,
It would be, first of all, we'd provide the information to all the residents who live there and to the managers of these sites, and I believe we'd put it in the plan.
Okay, so it would go in the next year's plan.
It would be in the moving to work
Okay.
plan as to how.
And then we'd have to operationalize it for staff as well.
Exactly.
To be able to apply the allocation.
It's all part of the plan.
Yes,
Okay.
there is a plan.
Because that's a scary voice to then address the commissioner in as well. Okay, so then, do you, any other questions? Because I have a couple, but I'm happy to take a pause.
I just want the commissioner to know that I'm not planning to leave once I come back to my renovated unit.
Well, what I was going to say is if you decided you wanted to go from Wyman House to the Brentwood,
Yes, that's my next question.
okay,
Yes,
then,
I know a lot of people
okay,
there.
so how do you do that? You don't go to the management office at the Brentwood and say, I'd like to move in. You go back to the housing authority and say, I want to be put on a transfer list. And then when there was a vacancy in the Brentwood, and if your name was at the top of the list, they'd call you in and say, okay, now you can go here. So in other words, we're not expecting residents to, from this building, to talk to the manager in this building over here. Everything goes up to us and back down. So it goes from the resident up to the housing authority, and then if you want to go over to another RAD site, we'll go down, communicate to the other manager. They'll then reach out to you. Or if
and
you
the
wanted to get a
transfer list-
voucher, you come to us,
grab this one.
and we will give you the voucher. So it's really, there'll be that continued link with the housing authority related to the waiting list, whether it's a transfer list from one RAD site to another, or whether it's I want to get on a voucher list after 2 years.
And the transfer list would take precedence over the general public housing list. You'd go.
Well, no, not necessarily. You get on a transfer list, you're really in the same setup, because we have, for instance, people who have a reasonable accommodation or immediate needs requirements under fair housing law, that they have to be moved from here to here because we can't provide the accommodation for some disability. In this building, they have to go. They would have a priority over a standard applicant, for instance. There are different categories, but they would be put on a list, and whatever the circumstances were of that specific person who asked for the transfer, they'll be slotted into that category, that priority category.
Okay, so somewhere is there a ranking, for the new developer owner of each building, is there an order of operations that they have to follow in filling the vacancy?
Well, they have to come to us and get the referral. They don't.
Okay.
This is a no-brainer for
So this-
them.
okay.
They say, "I've got a vacancy. Housing authority, can you send me a person?"
Okay,
We
so-
send them a person.
Same question.
They have
but
no
more
discretion.
More directly for you, inside housing authority, is there an order of operations for how you fill vacancies? And I see your mouthpiece over there has already claimed the microphone. So
Yes.
all right.
Well, it's a date and time of application process.
And I mean that as a loving term for a lawyer or general counsel.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. It's a date and time of the application. So
Oh.
that's how in order to be fair to folks who applied.
It's a first come, first serve.
Okay, yes,
Well,
exactly.
unless there was some
Unless
special
there
need, like
is-
a reasonable
correct.
accommodation or an immediate need,
Yeah.
which is articulated under federal fair housing law.
Right. Unless
But-
there's a,
things
But
are-
among those reasonable accommodations, if you had somebody who has that need, who's on the regular public housing list, and you had somebody who's on that who has that need, who's doing a building to building transfer,
It's
it
built-
would go by
within
first come,
within
first
any,
serve of
within
them.
any given category.
Okay,
It's
gotcha.
going to be date and time.
it's going to be, exactly,
Yeah.
regardless of the priority. And
Yeah.
Okay, so first come, first serve is within categories.
Yeah,
and then of categories,
Yeah, but the really
need
the
an
only
accommodation
it's-
above.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Above none. Councilwoman.
So just to follow up on that all.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 25,000 people that are on a public housing, no, they're on a voucher list.
Yes.
So, okay, right, okay, I
Totally
just answered
separate.
my own question. So I'm 2 years in the Wyman House, I want to transfer to the Brentwood.
Right.
I've got something that, I don't know, you didn't build a handicap ramp right or something. I know you wouldn't.
Yeah.
All right, do that. But,
Ever.
and I need it. So now I come to the housing authority,
Yes.
not my manager, and say, look, I mean, I'll live here. I love the place. I love the people, but
Right.
I got to have this that the Brentwood has.
Right.
So I want to be on a list. You
Right.
put me on the public housing list, RAD category. No,
No, it's
you
just on
don't.
a public housing waiting list for transfers. It's just
Oh,
a
you
list
put
for
me
transfers.
okay, so that's okay.
Yeah,
that's-
but
all right.
again, if you
put me
but
on-
if you have a reasonable accommodation need, then that's going to get special attention. By the way, on a reasonable accommodation, both we and the developer are obligated to first try to address that need in your current
On site.
location. So, like if there was a problem with the ramp, they would first go look at it and say, okay, how do we fix the ramp instead of moving you? So it's really
all right.
generally reasonable accommodations are addressed in
Small
place.
population.
Like maybe you need a roll-in shower or something that we couldn't, or maybe you needed some grab bars that those kinds of things. First obligation is we do it where you are. If we
Okay.
can do it where you are, then you don't have to move. If we can't for some reason do it where you are, then you go to a reasonable accommodation transfer.
So that's why you said way back at the beginning of this part of this hearing that it would be a very small you anticipate a very small population of RAD returnees coming back
Right.
into
Yeah,
their
yeah,
unit,
yeah.
their rehab unit, that would then be seeking a transfer anyway.
Right. I mean, I'm assuming that most people like their home, and they'll be even happier there because it's now
Right,
fully
like the wardrobe's
rehabbed,
fixed up.
and
Right.
that they don't want to move, and that it would only be one of two or three situations that might have somebody moving. It might be that there's some physical need that can't be addressed, and again, most of those could be addressed on site. It might be that they needed to move out of state to be with their daughter-in-law for that kind of thing.
I was thinking about that
Yeah.
all the time.
But
Exactly.
that would be
'Cause
where
if
you
she
go on the
leaves
list
that
for the
guy,
voucher. That would
Then
be the
I could
voucher.
live with her.
Live with her, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
that would be with a voucher.
And
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. And are you good? Okay. Then the only other question I have remaining, and I'm pretty sure that it's a yes or no question.
Okay.
Okay. And the other one is that, given the new the revelation about being able to work some of these aspects into the individual leases
Right.
with the tenants, that may address parts of it. The question that the one question remaining from this ring was, will residents have legal standing as third-party beneficiaries to the contracts between HABC and the developers?
They have the rights under their lease, which are now
Right.
expanded with these.
Right. So
Terms.
that's going to be their
That's the remedy,
the legal
yes.
remedy. Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. Then that was the extent of the. We'll walk through it with Antonia because it was an Antonia question from last year over at Homeless Persons Representation. So let me do this. At this point, I want to thank you very much. If you
Sure.
want to have a seat.
Sure.
And, I think we have two people. We have people signed up on the second sheet. We have one sheet of people who are signed in as attending and as attending these proceedings, but none of the people on the first sheet have checked the column saying that they wish to testify. Okay. So what? If you were on the first sheet, give Richard your name, and I'll check you off up here.
If you wish to testify.
Right? Richard Peterson, okay. All right, and Ms. Trueheart, excellent. Okay, so let me take Mr. Peterson first.
Good evening, esteemed colleagues, and how are y'all doing today?
I'm well, yourself?
Thank you. My name is Mitchell Peterson. I'm a vice president, attorney counsel at the Chase House, and I'm also a RAB delegate. And the questions that I have is that I was listening to Mr. Graziano, and he was saying that the letters that were sent out to HUD, the 2.5-page documents, well, those are HUD LTA requirements. What we would like to see and participate in are the negotiations held for the LTAs between between the new owners and the developers. We would like to participate in those negotiations because they are constantly changing. The LTAs underneath the HUD and under the new ownerships are being negotiated now as we speak. Unfortunately, we're not sitting there to participate in those negotiations. That was number one.
What is an LTA?
Long-term affordability.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I
that was-
apologize.
That's in the letter. I'm sorry, just if you could bear with me for a second.
Is that mean, but,
Yeah,
oh, it's in the letter. So that, for a second, excuse me, just,
yeah, okay.
where is it?
Just-
Oh, permanent, or this, or that. Oh, wait a minute.
But there's nothing. He was just showing that it's spelled out. That has nothing to do with his question.
it's-
No, this is so that's the program. LTA is the program then that new residents will come from HCDC's public housing and reasonable accommodation waiting lists and will be subject to screening under the HCDC's long-term affordable LTA program.
Yes, ma'am.
And just to be clear, when you're saying that we would like to be part of the negotiations,
Right.
who are we?
We residents that live in these particular buildings, me, myself, as a leadership in the building that I'm in.
So you're speaking for the tenant council at Chase?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. No, not yet. I want to get it out. Okay, and what else? And what? That was the first one.
Okay, and another few of the questions that I have is that
Now,
Well, technically, that's not a question.
That's not a question.
That's what
That's
you
just a
want.
statement.
Okay, gotcha.
that was
Right.
just a statement.
Right.
why can't we?
Pardon? We can turn it into a question. But,
Yeah,
okay,
why can't
but
we
I want to get out all the. Okay.
And another one of the questions I have, our housing authority said they will not be selling the land. And I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that something was written to the effect that they will not be selling the land, just the buildings. Well, my question was, what would be the terms of the long-term 99-year lease with the developers? That's one question. Is HCDC going to leverage the fact that they will own the land to impose affordability requirements on the developers in years 40 through 99?
Wow.
After the RAD affordability criteria expires, because the criteria for RAD is either 15 to 20 years, and it's automatically renewable for one term. So that would make it either 20 to 30 years.
Okay.
Can the public participate in determining those affordability requirements on the developers to maintain permanent affordability of the buildings? If so, how? If not, why?
Okay.
What will be HCDC role with the landlord-tenant issues. Will legal landlord-tenant issues be handled by HABC, or will it be handled by the property managers? These are things that we don't know. The other part of that is the housing commissioner is saying that they will buy back the buildings. So what I wanted to know, the terms under the RAD contracts are 15 years for project-based vouchers, 20 years for project-based rental assistance vouchers. HBAC is waiting to see if they get a waiver from HUD in order to go with PBRJ. It is a requirement of the RAD program that these contracts be automatically renewed for one cycle, which that's how you got to 15 to 30.
You've now exceeded my my understanding of acronyms. So back PBRJ.
Okay, PV. And the other one is PBV, which is project-based voucher.
Okay. All right.
It's the same thing, isn't it?
No, there's two different.
As far as the resident goes, it would look the same, but it's two different funding streams.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. It does the same thing for me.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a 30% limit on what I pay in rent, whatever
The question
it's
is,
called. Yeah. I'm still living at Wyman House here, up here.
Hey, hold on. Mr. Peterson has the floor. Okay, so the fifth one was those two, and then
the question is, what is the word from HUD on the waivers? Will HBABC be using PVJ, which is project-based vouchers, or will they be using PBRA, which is project-based rental assistance voucher? And how long will HBAC be able? How will HBAC be able to afford to purchase 22 high-rise buildings back in a span of 2 years if they can't afford to maintain them now? And if they're going to purchase them back, is there a fund being placed in for the purchase price? And if there is a fund, what will determine the future buyback prices of the buildings? Will it be strictly based on market forces, or will it be based on the price that they paid, that they allow the developers to come in and purchase the buildings for, when they get ready to buy them back?
okay.
Because they're supposed to be buying the buildings back from the developers.
Just what I'm remembering from the last hearing is there was going to be the ability to buy them. There's an option.
Yes, sir.
It would matter at the time the decision would be made whether or not to exercise it.
Yes,
it was
sir.
not. We were not. It was not implied to us that they were committing to definitely doing it.
Okay.
It was more along the lines of it was available as an option if the housing authority of 40 years from now felt that that would be needed to maintain the level of affordable housing that Baltimore needs at that point. But I just want to make sure I have all of your questions before I ask you to sit down so that the commissioner can have the podium to address some of the questions. Is that
Yes, you do.
okay?
Yes, you do.
Yeah, clearly you have an extensive. Would there be a way that you can email us those afterwards?
Copy of your list?
Sure.
Or do
Yes,
you have
ma'am.
that right now? Okay,
Yes, ma'am.
Richard will grab that. And
We'll have it,
Okay.
yeah, okay. And now what I wanna. Okay, so do you have those? I mean,
Most of them, it was a long list, but what I would start out by saying, there is a Resident Advisory Board, RAD committee,
okay.
that we've been working with that has really gone over all these issues. So there is a group of residents represented by the RAB, in the RAB, who are dealing with these RAD issues with the Housing Authority.
And
That's
let me just
yeah.
pause you to ask, because this is something that we run into from time to time, and
Yeah.
it explains why we end up with situations like this, where Mr. Peterson is specifically from
Chase
a
House.
specific tenant, a tenant
Yeah.
council of one of the buildings at Chase.
Right.
Okay, but so like, and a
Yeah.
RAD delegate. Are you on the RAD committee?
I'm at every RAD hearing. I've been there for the last 3 months.
Okay, all right. Gotcha,
Okay,
gotcha.
so I'm sure a lot of this was covered there. Let me see. In terms of the ground lease, It is a document that allows us to control long-term affordability. So the federal law requires that there's a 20-year project-based rental assistance. Maybe I should step back. We're doing project-based rental assistance as opposed to project-based vouchers. There are some technical reasons why we're doing that, but it also has to do with appropriations risk. Our assessment is that the project-based rental assistance is the most likely to be funded in the long term. Public housing has been slashed in funding. Voucher program, they've begun to chip away at the fees and so forth. The one program they've never cut is the project-based rental assistance. And Congress views that situation as contracts between individual developers and the federal government. I would argue their contracts with housing authorities ought to have equal weight, but it doesn't get viewed that way. So we picked project-based rental assistance because we felt that it would...
Maybe you guys need better lobbyists in front of Congress.
You know, it's, well, one's... but so that was one of our major considerations. We also... there are some technical reasons why we can get somewhat higher subsidies out of that program than out of the project-based vouchers. But that's, to answer that question, we're going with the project-based rental assistance. And the only difference between the two programs that really matters day to day to residents is that the project-based voucher program, you get a voucher, you could get a tenant-based voucher to move after 1 year. The project-based rental assistance, it's 2 years, and that's just statutory, but all the other benefits far exceed that relatively minor inconvenience in the unlikely event that somebody wants to move.
Can I reframe one of Mr. Peterson's questions?
Sure.
In a fashion, when you're talking about how would physically the buying back part work? One of the ways I'd like to reframe that is do the agreements that you have right now with the developer owners, do they spell out the method by which the future price of the buildings would be valued?
I don't know if it's been fully negotiated, but they will spell it out. They'll spell out a process.
Generally, yes. These are all being funded through the low-income housing tax credit program. There's a standard method of buyback for those programs, and typically after 15 years, the investor, who owns 99.99% of the project, has received their tax benefits. They're not in it for the long-term ownership, and they will usually sell. They're not looking for a major addition in price to get out. They usually just want their taxes covered. In addition, we have a loan on these projects as we're selling the deals. The projects are not actually paying us that purchase price, and there'll be some cash flow coming us, but there'll be a very large loan left outstanding. So the purchase price to buy back that 99.99% interest is generally going to be quite small. It's not millions of dollars. We're running numbers on that to make sure, there's a potential. It's about taxes, so it can get complicated, but it's usually quite a reasonable number, and we don't think it would be an issue at that time if we choose to buy them back.
Okay.
Yeah, and and again, whatever the outstanding loan is that we have would be offsetting the bulk of that price anyway. And again, remember, these guys that invest in these deals, they don't make money on the cash flow or the sale of the property. They make money by the value of the federal tax credit, which is allocated over 10 years. So they can write that off their bottom line on their earnings. A tax credit, as I'm sure most people know, is different than a deduction. It is a dollar for dollar offset of your taxes due. So you pay cash to the developer for that tax benefit that gets spread out over 10 years. And if you're in that situation, and then the opt-out is after 15 years, you don't want a situation where you're creating some other major tax event for you, because your whole thing was to avoid the taxes, not to create another tax event. So anyway, that's pretty well established as Peter said, in this program has been around for decades, and there's a well-established process. As to the ground rent and how do we ensure long-term affordability? Well, the statute says there'll be a 20-year contract between HUD and the developer under the project-based rental assistance program. And it also says the developer must sign a 20-year renewal. The ground rent, and there are also provisions, the state of Maryland, when they do their tax credit deals, really calls for a 40-year affordability period as well. But beyond that, the ground lease situation allows us to say to the owner, if you refuse to sign an extension that
For the affordability.
for the affordability, we can foreclose on the property. So there's that situation. So if you sort of belt and suspenders and another pair of suspenders here in terms of the different protections that would be built in there.
And just to be clear, if you use your ground rent to foreclose on the property, you are still back in the same favorable position of, when the 40 years runs out of, if you're buying it back, you're paying a relatively small cash premium because you've still got your outstanding loan on the property?
Well, yeah. I mean, the only real risk here is the risk that we have anywhere today, which is what I mentioned, is the appropriations risk.
Yeah.
If Congress stops funding a program, then that wouldn't matter what the intent of the developer was or of the housing authority. But as I've laid out for you, this year, for instance, in the public housing operating program, we're getting 85% of the money we should be getting. Everybody in the country is being prorated. They said, here's the formula. You should get 100% of this formula. But Congress has appropriated only enough money to fund 85% of that. So we already know there's a huge risk in the public housing program. We also know, as I said, it would take us 200 years to do the work we're doing in 2 years to do the $330 million. So the buildings will be falling down. So if there's no safe harbor here in the sense that let's keep it public housing and it's guaranteed to be preserved as affordable. Well, it won't even be guaranteed to be physically there, and there's no guarantee that they won't continue to slash the funding. In fact, one of the points that came up between our last hearing and tonight's session is because of a change in the formula for the way the Housing Authority of Baltimore City is funded under something called our Moving to Work agreement with HUD. If we didn't do the RAD, not only could we not do the $330 million worth of work, but we would lose $16.3 million per year in that public housing operating subsidy. By moving to the RAD program, it allows us to move that $16.3 million into the new project-based rental assistance contracts and preserve that money. If we keep it as public housing, there won't be any rehab, and we're going to lose $16.3 million per year to run those properties.
Why?
So, because they're changing the formula on us. But that's a different story.
That's a different hearing happening in a different city.
Actually, that's something we might want the city council to send a letter to HUD expressing concern, because we're very concerned. The mayor and I have been to Washington. We met with the HUD secretary. We met at the White House. We're very concerned about proposed cuts to the housing authority that could total as much as $46.3 million under this new formula. But by doing this program,
by doing this, you're wrapping
the RAD
yourself
conversion, it would protect a minimum of $16.3 million of that money.
of that potential.
I should say it's 42 million, 42.3 million is what they're saying the maximum cut could be.
And of that-
16.3 million of that is money that would be protected by the RAD
travel
conversion.
over to this new scenario.
Yeah. So that's another reason that we're doing $330 million with the construction we could never do, and we're protecting $16.3 million of year-to-year
Because-
operating subsidy that we would lose.
Because I'm sorry.
It's
Because whoever they are over there, they see the private sector, they see all this stuff they like, and so they have done a better job of funding the new program than they are planning to do in keeping the regular public housing
Yeah,
program
public
going.
housing has the lowest priority in terms of appropriations in the federal housing program at this point.
And RAD is seen as, gee whiz,
The new program.
partnerships.
Yes, yes,
Thank you.
yes. You're welcome.
One of the people who does the real work for me will be in touch with one of the people who does the real work for you, and we'll have a resolution that we can walk around with our
Okay,
colleagues.
good, thank you.
Just, I think the last question on Mr. Peterson's list I'm going to turn it into a question was.
Is this about the long-term affordable and the negotiations or whatever?
It was the negotiations. It's if you could talk about how the you have this RAD committee of the RAB
Yes.
that is already functioning as in-house public input for you as you work through this program. How are they involved in the negotiations between Housing Authority and the developers?
Well, the specific question was about the long-term affordable agreement, and I just want to be clear, we're not negotiating with the individual developers on the long-term affordable agreement. We're having discussions, and somebody tweak me if I miss a detail here, but we're having discussions with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development of technical amendments to the long-term affordable program, which
right.
HUD had approved previously to be targeted specifically to some activity related to the Bailey program. We're extending that to apply to all these sites, and there's some technical tweaks. That's not something we're negotiating with developers. I'm sure we're keeping the RAB folks apprised of that, but we're not, quote, negotiating these modifications, and they're mostly pretty much all technical in nature.
Okay. Did you look like you might have something to add to that?
I mean, the commissioner said it perfectly, but I just wanted to say that HUD has reviewed the LTA criteria, that's what we refer to it as, which allows for public housing-like requirements in the management and operation of the RAD sites. And we've had to ask for waivers of certain provisions in the RAD statute to allow us to apply some of the criteria because of conflicts. We believe that HUD is going to grant the waiver. We have not gotten the final approval yet, but there are some formatting issues, technical issues, because HUD has a 735-page multifamily housing guidebook that it wants to see how we can incorporate the LTA criteria into those requirements so that folks are looking at the total picture when they're operating the buildings.
Gotcha.
So it's more of a formatting issue. There's absolutely no negotiations with any developers concerning the substance of the LTA criteria.
Okay.
And we're thinking of giving a copy of that 739-page document to every resident. It's sort of like having a little Bible next to your bed. You can sit there at night and read the 700. Pick a chapter a night or something. It's insane the level of detail in some of these federal regs, but.
Okay, so Mr. Peters, if you don't mind, if you have a few minutes after the hearing, if you can stick around, I'd like to talk to you some more about some of the other things that were on the list that we didn't go through tonight.
Sure.
Okay, thank you,
Sure.
Commissioner. And then the last person we have signed up to testify or ask questions, as the case may be, would be Ms. Kim Trueheart.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name's Kim Trueheart, resident of Baltimore. You started out discussing the previous hearing on this, and I'm not clear that we got answers to some of those questions from that previous hearing. And if they were provided to the council, I'd like to know where they are.
Were there specific questions that you think were asked at the previous hearing that were not
There was
answered?
lots of discussion on labor issues. I haven't heard anything about that.
We did not talk about that tonight.
Nope.
There were, actually, that's true. When you were doing the initial discussion, you did not cover the employment section that is listed in the RAD reports of May, less in June. Appears to be mostly May's. Oh, no, some in December. But I mean, I guess, saying that we haven't talked about it at this point, it would be helpful if you had a specific question that you wanted to bring back from then. Was there a particular labor-related question that you had?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So please.
There are current employees who are very concerned that they won't have jobs under the transition to these private developers. Mm-hmm. I noted on the website that there was some kind of job fair or some job thing that went on. I think it would be helpful to discuss what that was, what outcomes came from it, and have there been any discussions with labor to satisfy their concerns. They're not here tonight, so I'd like to think they're happy, but I'd really like to know whether they're happy or not. And so, you know, so that's one question. Okay. What has happened since the last hearing in the labor dispute that was made public during that hearing? Very public. And there were even protests. Okay. So I think that's a fair question. Routinely, when I think it's the it's the HCD, Housing and Community Development. When they present things before the Board of Estimates, I protest them quite often. And I make a general statement in most of the protests that I really want this agency to go away in its form and be reformulated such that the elected officials that I vote for have some concrete oversight responsibility, because right now you don't.
I'm sorry, were you talking about the Housing Authority or the Housing and Community Development?
HCDC, I want both of them gone. I want a new organization formed that this body has oversight of. I want, as maybe an appeasing outcome, I note in the Board of Estimates that there are always reports and things that get submitted to the board almost on a weekly basis from the various agencies around the city, noting things that they've done. And I think it would be appropriate for HABC to do the same, not necessarily requesting approval from that body or even the city council, but just providing updates on various things. As a program manager, I'd like to think that this RAD program has a pretty extensive program schedule with significant milestones. And I think it would be beneficial, not just for this body, but in particular this body, to know when those milestones occur. When is the first resident going to be relocated? So, because you're going to get some phone calls. You're going to need to want to know. If I was an elected official, I'd want to know when that date is going to occur. So I would think it would be prudent for HABC to provide you maybe not the entire program schedule and its milestones, but some semblance of it, and make it available to us so that we can keep pace. I spent a tremendous amount of time helping people navigate through the bureaucracy, and it would be helpful to know when the wave is going to come. Okay. The other thing, when residents are relocated outside the building, is it into a comparable unit to what they currently have? And I didn't hear the answer to that. They could relocate somebody into a hotel room that doesn't have a kitchen and doesn't have access to maybe a washer, and they're very used to that sort of thing. And so I would think that understanding that would be helpful. There is a big issue that is the elephant in the room right now, and we are experiencing that with the $107 million TIF that we gave some guy down by the water that has elevated the property values and our wealth in this city such that it is impacting the school aid that we get from the state, because now they think that we're rich. I want to know whether or not this project of tax breaks to developers will have any impact as the property values go up as a result of the renovations, whether or not it is a tax-paying property or a non-tax-paying property, the tax value will be assessed. And will that assessment also impact the wealth of this community such that we're about to lose $46 million because the wealth in Baltimore City has elevated as a result of these multiple tax breaks we keep doling out to friends of somebody? Has there been an assessment done on the tax implications of this move on us here locally? Okay, labor issues, notification of significant milestones, property values, and the relocation. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, and I want to also thank you for giving me a segue, because I was very frustrated by the article in the paper about the we'll call it the wealth effect, and I had a couple people reach out to me about it, and I want to take just a moment to tell you the same story that I told them, which was back when I was in college, a friend of mine was complaining to me because the way that the financial aid form for the college was constructed, there was no spot on it to include commuter taxes. And her father, they lived in New Jersey, but he worked in New York, so he paid commuter taxes to New York City. But there was no spot on the form for that. And so as a result, her family looked wealthier to the school, and the school wanted their money, but the money wasn't actually there. And I stressed the point of that story that the problem was not that New York City collects a commuter tax on residents of New Jersey. The problem is that there was no spot on the form. And so I will say the same thing now publicly that I said privately back when my colleague commissioned a report in 2011 which warned of the possibility of this happening, which is we need to get our delegation in the General Assembly working on this to make sure that the formula gets changed so that this is not a problem for. And so I think I got it, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask whether or not this has already been, this has already been talked about in terms of will this add to the same kind of woes that we're having now for those development projects. But I want to stress that while that should be done as part of the due diligence, what really needs to be done to solve that problem is the formula needs to be changed. Okay, but well, about the what needs to be done about the problem of the city school system suffering a reduction in state aid to its schools because of virtual wealth increase in the city.
Right, and if they hadn't found that reason,
They would have found
they
another.
would have found another.
We just need to vote.
Right.
Let me take that last point first.
Really?
First of all, in terms of revenue to the city for these properties, they currently pay a payment in lieu of taxes, which is a very minimal amount, which is as authorized under federal law. There's a cooperation agreement between the city of Baltimore and the Housing Authority, and that's a precondition for the federal government providing the money to build these properties and to subsidize them over the years. So it's a very different pilot than the ones that you.
But do you know does anybody know if SDAT actually values these buildings
Well, I was
currently?
going to say, it's based on a formula which is 10% of shelter rents minus utilities.
Oh.
Shelter rents are very, very low, and utilities are high, so it's a minimal amount. The assessment process
you have
is-
colleagues who might want
yeah,
to amplify this.
The assessment process is not the same standard.
It's not, but there's state law that requires for tax credit deals that they be assessed at their limited income value, not their replacement value or their potential income value. And since these are very limited income, since they are still serving very low income residents, it's our belief that, it's always up to the state to assess, but if they follow those rules, it should not cause a major increase in the assessment.
Because just the fact that the buildings themselves are being improved is not going to change the value of the rents being collected.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
So with the buildings down in Harbor East, for example, that building is now sitting on a piece of land that used to be vacant, and so that property is assessed at $100 million more than it used to be. So that creates false wealth when we're not actually collecting taxes on it. Even though we're going to be doing, or somebody is going to be doing, $300 million worth of work on these buildings, because of the way that state law requires that they be valued, the assessment on them will not go up by $320 million as it might if they were normal private properties. Is that a fair restatement?
That's how we believe it should go. If only we controlled the state assessment office, it would be better. But that's how it should proceed.
That's how it should work.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, the actual
I got
the actual the revenues to the city will be the same as they were before, because they're just the same pilot payment would be paid. It's built into this development budget. So that's the revenue of the city is the same. That you shouldn't see a big increase in the valuation.
Let's work backwards. Is there any type of policy in place, either under the existing federal regs or federal law, for requiring that if there is a relocation that is necessary as a result of the renovation, that it be to a comparable unit?
If it requires a true relocation, it would kick in the Uniform Relocation Act, which does require comparability. What I would expect, again, is that most people would be out in a hospitality suite for a day, or they might be moved down the hall to another apartment. It might be that that somebody could, in fact, might choose to say, I'll go into a hotel room for 3 days, as opposed to moving to another apartment. It might actually be more convenient, and you provide them with food and so forth. So there are situations like that. I think it's going to be a case by case, but but overall it's controlled by the Federal Uniform Relocation Act, and if there's any true relocation, it requires comparable housing at a comparable cost.
I took your previous timeline of the closings are going to be starting in May,
Yes.
with construction to follow
Yes.
shortly thereafter. I took shortly to be within 4 to 6 weeks. 2 weeks. Okay. So I'm taking it that that's when the relocations will begin in terms of however they're going to work for
Yeah.
the individual properties in the phase 1 buildings.
Yeah.
I would ask that if, as you get closer and you have more specific start times available, if you could make sure that you notify the council people for those buildings.
Yeah. We'll,
and the council people will be the sort of the focal point for that information distribution. I'm saying this from the perspective of the people in the buildings are going to get those notifications automatically. But if there is anyone in the general public who just would like to be knowing what's going on, I think it's most appropriate for the council people to be the, the place where you go to ask those questions. I'm going to skip for now the blowing up your agency question and deal with that myself at the end.
Okay.
But if you could take a very few minutes to talk about how HABC is addressing the concerns raised by the employees as to who was still going to have a job and working for who.
Okay, and I would put that also all under the umbrella, the new information that came subsequent to the early discussion, which was that we'd be losing $16.3 million of subsidy, which means for those properties, which means we'd lose about half of the subsidy for those properties. So if we didn't do the conversion, we would have to slash the staff just to balance the budget. And it'd be a severe cut because there's some things you can't cut, like the utility costs and things like that. So it would have been a horrific situation. But in any event, what we did is many months ago, actually, we imposed a freeze on hires permanent hires in the positions that are in those job titles for those particular areas. And so that if people left, and we've seen a significant amount of attrition over time, we would either not fill the position or fill it with a temporary employee who was advised up front that they were hired temporary, and if they want to accept that, they can have a job. If they didn't want to accept that, then we didn't have a job to offer them. So that when buildings were converted, that there would be vacancies that people could move into out of the RAD sites. That was the first thing we did. And there has been a lot of attrition since, and I think at this point we have really only a couple of positions that are quote oversubscribed for that first phase. The other thing is that all of the developers, at our urging, at our insistence, have now made offers to interview all of the employees at their sites, and that's a process that's out there. And I don't know, Kim, if you want to report on where we are with that.
Because of the delay in closing, we had anticipated closings in late last year or the early part of this year. They are not interviewing right now, but they have all signed letters of commitment to interview. We had a meeting last July with all of the developers and all three presidents and vice presidents of the local, along with Mr. Middleton, who is the big honcho, and all of the developers explained their model, which is we like to have people who know the buildings, know the residents, continue to work with us. There has been a reluctance on the part of our employees to want to leave the housing authority, which is understandable. But through attrition and the hiring freeze, at least in phase one, we don't anticipate a loss of employment. People may move to other positions within the agency, not at the RAD sites. We're hoping that as we move forward with education and, the contract is getting signed, so people should be getting their increases soon, and that should put everybody in a better frame of mind that they will be open to perhaps interviewing with the developers to continue to work at the sites.
And the last piece is, and next Tuesday, right? Next Tuesday, we'll be going to the Housing Authority Board with another piece that we had committed to the union that we would pursue, which is an early retirement incentive system for employees who, might have said, well, I'll wait another 5 years, but maybe they would see this as an opportunity. And so we expect that some number of people will take up that option, which will also sort of accelerate the attrition rate and further ensure that we don't have significant impacts on the workforce. And these are totally voluntary retirement incentives for early retirement. Voluntary early retirement incentive.
Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Well, it's just that right now it's you have to be at least 55 years old and 10 years of service. And if you stay longer, it's worth more plus for age and for years of service. We're reducing it to age 50. Well, the 55 will stay the same for certain technical reasons, but we'll allow people with 9 years to get credit for the 10th year. Also, if you're beyond the 55 and 10, you can get a year of a year credit and a year on both sides, and that's worth more in your pension if you want to take the pension. It's also worth more in terms of a lump sum if you want to take. You have an option to take either the amount of money that's in your retirement account as a lump sum payment, or if you elect to take the quote pension, what we do is we purchase an annuity with your money that we've put into your fund, by the way, and that will then be paid out over time like a regular retirement pension. So either way, whether you elect to take the pension monthly or whether you elect to take the lump sum, you'll get more money because we've given you credit for time not served.
I will qualify that this has to go before our Board of Commissioners for approval.
Yes, that's the proposal. It has not been formally presented to the board. We've had discussions with individual board members, but as you know, things have to go through a process.
So let me, and you can sit down for this part, because let me address the part about blowing up HABC and rebuilding an agency that is more responsive, or actually that the City Council would have oversight for. As members of your staff may or may not have reported to you, we've had substantive discussions about this program and the general operations of HABC, and I'm sure that they are aware of the fact that I would love to live in a world where the City Council could simply require that HABC do this or do that, but that would be a world where HABC was not a federal agency, but was in fact a city agency, and this would be the key thing that I would not only share with those of us here, but also the viewers at home. That would be a world where Baltimore City government actually paid for the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, and this is the key thing. We actually don't pay for the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. It is federal money that comes directly in to HABC. It does not come into the city and have the city's budget determine in the course of its budget process how much money is going to come to the Housing Authority. And this is America, and if you aren't paying anything for it, it's really hard to justify you controlling how it works. I understand that there may often be a strong desire on the part of the public for this body or bodies that they feel are more directly responsive to them to have a greater level of oversight or control over the housing authority. But as one of my colleagues taught me years ago, the city council prayer is you look for the wisdom to know the difference between the things you can change and the things you can't. And in this case, if you want something incredibly substantive done to the structure of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, I'm going to have to refer you to one of our federal representatives, all of whom have offices in the Baltimore metropolitan area, and many of whom are available in person for conversation on topics like why doesn't the federal government do more for housing in the cities of this country. That little bit of a rant being said, and seeing no additional questions from the panel here, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Commissioner Graziano and his staff for your appearing before us today, for answering the questions that you have answered, and I think at this point, given that we have done our housekeeping up front in terms of the vote on the resolution that prompted this hearing, I am going to conclude this public work session on the resolution. Thank everyone for attending and ask that you please check the area around you to make sure that you have not left anything, because we are going to ask that you proceed forthwith to the exit on the first floor, because at this point in the evening, Baltimore City Hall is closed. Thank you very much for joining us here at the council chambers at this time. Thank you. Thank you.